In our study of Revelation into chapter 7. And just as a very, very quick reminder, we saw that in chapter 5, we saw that vision of God on the throne, right, with the scroll in his hand, the scroll identified as the title deed to planet Earth. And we talked about all that. Adam lost dominion of the earth, and so basically that's what the Lion of the tribe of Judah did. He came and he took that scroll out, the title deed, and he alone was worthy to take back the planet. And we talked about how God was still the owner of the planet, and he held the deed in his hand this whole time, but Satan basically held sway over the hearts and minds of all of humanity. So in chapter 5, Jesus, the second Adam, comes and begins to loosen those seals and open the scroll. And so last time we were together, we were looking at chapter 6, and in chapter 6, the Lamb begins to open the seals on that scroll. And just as a very quick reminder, the first seal is a rider on a white horse. We identified that rider as the rise, representing the rise of false prophets and false Christ. It is juxtaposed against the true white horse rider over in chapter 19, the Lord Jesus Christ. The second seal was opened, and it was a rider on a red horse. And we looked at this, and this rider is the unleashing of war and conflict on the earth. It says he was given to him to take peace from the earth. The third seal was a black horse representing famine and poverty and hyperinflation. And even though the oil and wine was told not to be touched by the angel. And that represents, I believe, the luxury item. So this is a picture of a world that's in poverty, a world that's having a really hard time making it from week to week and day to day. But yet the rich, it seems, are going to be untouched in this. And that's basically kind of the way we see things even today. The fourth seal was a pale horse. This was kind of a sickly, yellowish looking green, and it represented the releasing of disease and pestilence on the earth. The fifth seal revealed martyrs that were crying out for vengeance and justice. And finally, the sixth seal was the unleashing of great upheaval in nature. There were earthquakes, possible meteor impacts. It's debated whether that's some literal language or it's meant to be understood symbolically, just of great upheaval. But the point is there's great cataclysm connected with that sixth seal when it's opened. And the result in verse 15, it says, "And so then the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come." And so that's what we're going to begin to see. We're going to begin to see ultimately in chapter 8, really the wrath of God begin to be poured out on the earth. Something very important, and I want to reiterate this to you tonight, that to me is major in interpreting chapter 6, and that is that this chapter corresponds really almost exactly to what Jesus spoke of in Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse. Matthew 24:4, it says, "Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many." That's horse number 1. "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars." Horse number 2. "See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines." Horse number 3. "Pestilences," horse number 4, "and earthquakes in various places. All these," Jesus says, "are the beginning of sorrows." They're not the end, but they're really what I would consider to be the beginning of the end. And then this is during the same period of time, he says they will deliver you up to tribulation, and they will kill you. You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake, and then many will be offended and will betray one another and will hate one another. And that corresponds to horse number 5. Then finally down in verse 29, through 31, it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And all that's just almost exact language, right, that we're seeing at with the opening of the sixth seal. It says, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. That's that last trump. And they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. And again, that's horse number 6. So again, verse 6 says explicitly that all these things, and it corresponds to Revelation 6, says that these things are not the end. Jesus stresses that. This is not the end at this point. But they are the lead up to the end. And then again, verse 8 says these things are the beginning of sorrows or birth pains that the earth is going to go through. George Ladd has a great commentary on Revelation. He said, George Eldon Ladd, and he says, quote, these events of Revelation 6 are not a part of the Great Tribulation itself, but are preparatory and preliminary to the Great Tribulation. This conclusion is reinforced by the fact that the breaking of the sixth seal clearly brings us to the threshold of the end and the outpouring of God's wrath. Therefore, these 6 seals must precede the end, or must precede this final display of God's wrath. So with that said, that's basically just kind of in a few paragraphs there what we've looked at. Let's move on to chapter 7, and we're going to start with verse 1 through 8 tonight. We're going to take a break after tonight. Next week is the Awana party, so we will not be having Revelation class next week. And then the next 2 weeks, we're actually not going to have church at all during the holidays. Just kind of give everybody a break and let everybody enjoy their time with their family and that kind of thing. So we're going to take about 3 weeks break from this. So we're not going to get through chapter 7 tonight. I wish we could have. I originally thought I would try to do that, but we're going to definitely do verse 1 through 8, and then when we come back, we'll pick up 9 through 17. But let's just read verse 1 through 8, and then we'll start to break it down. So, Revelation 7 and verse 1. It says, after these things I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth. And remember that last verse of chapter 6, right? The time of the wrath of the Lamb has come. So he says, I saw these 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 were sealed. The tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. The tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 were sealed. Verse 7, the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 were sealed. And of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000, and of the tribe, finally, of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. All right? Now, I want to just jump right into this tonight, and I want to answer what is really the big question here. And the big question is who exactly are the 144,000? And there's basically 2 schools of thought on this, really only 2 ways I think this could come down. You could throw some really weird ones in there, like the Jehovah's Witnesses. The Jehovah's Witnesses, when they started, they actually thought that their number was going to be terminated at 144,000, and then Jesus was going to come. And so then there got to be 144,001 Jehovah's Witnesses, and their whole theology was blown out of the water. So they changed it up, and they've got a weird concocted theory about the 144,000. So there's a lot of weird ones out there, but there's really basically only two, I think, that are worthy really of consideration. The first idea is the idea that these 144,000 are to be taken literally as literal Jews. And most who subscribe to this go further with it, and you will hear it said that these are 144,000 Jewish evangelists who will evangelize during the time of the Great Tribulation. All right? Now, I have absolutely no idea where that comes from. The only, really thing you could say about it, I guess, is they say, well, they're the servants of God, so therefore they must be evangelists. I don't know how you make that leap of logic, but you'll hear this. You'll hear it in a lot of pre-tribulational rapture literature. It's primarily a thing of dispensationalism, but that's what they say. I have no idea where they get that. To me, that is pure eisegesis. Exegesis is when you take the text and you extract out of the text what it is actually saying. Eisegesis is when you take your own ideas and you read them into the text. And this, to me, is a major example of eisegesis, and it's not really very compelling eisegesis at that. I think it's just kind of, I don't know where the argument comes from. But the argument is that the literal tribes of Israel are named, and that we must take Revelation literally. All right? And again, we've dealt with this issue of, is Revelation to be taken literally or not? We took that early on. If you remember the very first verse, Revelation 1 and verse 1 says that this is the revelation that God gave to John through the angel, and he sent and signified it. And we talked early on about that word signified. It means literally he expressed it to him in symbols, in prophetic symbols. But it tells us that the book of Revelation is indeed, it's a book of symbolism. It's a book of symbols throughout. And my answer to that diatribe, that Revelation has to be taken seriously. You have to read it and just believe exactly what it's saying, is always, my go-to thing on that is always Revelation chapter 13. And in Revelation chapter 13, there's a big beast that comes up out of the ocean and goes climbing around and stomping around, and wreaking havoc. And if we're to take it literal, do you really believe, right, that there's going to be this big Godzilla-like thing that's going to come up out of the ocean and stomp around? Well, we know from Daniel 7 that beast is actually a representation of the kingdom of Antichrist. Daniel saw some very similar things, but it's not to be taken literal at all. There is not going to be a big Godzilla thing that comes up and starts stomping through the earth. So that's my answer when people say, oh, we have to take it literal. Well, no, we don't. The very nature of the book is that it's not literal. It's expressed in symbols, all right? But that's one view, that we're to take this literally. These are actual Jews, 12,000 from each actual tribe of Israel. The other view, and I would say that this really, in my opinion, is the majority view among exegetes, especially it is the majority view among all exegetes that are not dispensational. If you're reading one type of literature, if you're reading primarily dispensational literature, and there's a lot of this in out there today. There's a lot of this on the airwaves. There's a lot of dispensationalists. I don't know why dispensationalism took such a root and hold that it did in our day, but it seems like from the early days of the charismatic renewal, dispensationalism has ruled. But for anyone who's not dispensational, that is not the majority view. The majority view is that this is to be understood as being symbolic of the church that is alive and well on planet Earth during the time that this is going to take place. In other words, this is not 144,000 literal Jews, but it's a symbolic number, and it speaks of not ethnic Israel, the Jews, but it speaks of spiritual Israel, the church. And there's several reasons for this, all right? And to me, the evidence for this is overwhelming in the book. And in my opinion, it is airtight. I mean, I just, when people hear what I'm about to say and say, no, we got to take it literal. It's literal Jews. I just don't get it, man, because, I mean, it's just clear as the nose on your face, all right? So what is it that I'm talking about? Well, first of all, is John's understanding of the dichotomy between spiritual and ethnic Israel. John makes much of this throughout the whole book of Revelation. You can see this on YouTube, and I looked it up in the North Pulaski Redeemer Church YouTube page. If you go to our page and you go back, to the beginning of this series, it's been several months now, go back to when we were talking about chapter 2, and the title of it is the church at Smyrna, okay? And we've been over this before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it tonight, but the point is, we looked there at Revelation 2:9. This is Jesus' word to the church at Smyrna, and he says, I know your works, tribulation, and your poverty, but yet you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. All right? So there were Jewish, ethnic Jews there at Smyrna that were persecuting the church. And Jesus says, look, man, he says, I know the blasphemy of those. They say they're Jews, but they're not, okay? They're not true Israel. And again, in Revelation 3:9, again, he emphasizes it. He says, indeed, I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie, I will make them to come and worship before your feet and to know that I have loved you. And this is a reflection really out of the Gospels in John chapter 8. We won't go over there tonight for time, but Jesus gets into it in John 8 with the Pharisees, and they're really going at it and going back and forth. And at one point, Jesus, they said, we are children of Abraham, right? We're disciples of Moses. We're children of Abraham. And Jesus says, if Abraham was really your father, in other words, if you were really Jewish, right? If you were really descendants of Abraham, he says, you would recognize me and you would follow me. But then he says, but you are not of Abraham. You are of your father. Who? The devil. You're of your. I mean, can you imagine Jesus? This is Jesus Christ, man. The gentle Jesus, right? You guys, you're not real Jews. You're just of your father, the devil. And that's pretty blunt language, but that's what's being expressed here in Revelation 2:9 and 3:9. These are those who say they are Jews but are not, but lie. And then in the Pauline epistles, the writings of Paul, Romans 2:28 through 29, Paul says, he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men but from God. A man's not a Jew just because he's one outwardly, but a true spiritual Jew is one who is one inwardly. And in Romans 9:6 through 8, it says, Paul's lamenting that a lot of Israelites are not coming to faith. A lot of his Jewish brethren are not getting saved. He says, but it's not that the word of God has taken no effect. Why? Now listen to this. He says, for they are not all Israel who are of Israel, nor are they all children, meaning children of God, because they are the seed of Abraham, but only in Isaac your seed shall be called. And then he explains. He says, that is, those who are the children of the flesh, those who are ethnic Israel. And listen to what he says. These are not the children of God. I don't know how you can get any plainer than that. Just because you're Jewish does not mean that you've got some kind of inroad with God and that you're, somehow have some kind of a relationship with the God of Israel. He says, the children of the flesh are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as the seed. And we are part of that company, right? We are children of God. We are children of Abraham through faith in Jesus Christ. So were there ethnic Jews that were saved? Certainly. And there's ethnic Jews that are saved today. But ethnic Jew or not, everybody comes to God the same way. You got to come to God through Jesus Christ and through the blood of Jesus. There's no special arrangement. There is a heresy, a damnable heresy, in my opinion, called dual covenant theology that says basically God's got something going on with the Jews, that he's got a way he's going to get them to heaven, but then there's everybody else, right? And we would fall into the everybody else category, which are saved through Jesus, but the Bible entertains nothing like that anywhere in it. Everybody comes the same way. Everybody comes through repentance and through faith in Jesus Christ. I'd really recommend, if you want more information on that, to listen to that YouTube video. Again, we went into Galatians 4, 21 through 31. I'm not going to read it all again tonight, but it basically talks about the birth of Ishmael. Remember, Ishmael was born to Hagar. He was truly a child of Abraham, but he was born naturally. He was born through Hagar. Abraham literally went into Hagar and produced this offspring. Sarah was barren, but yet God said, it's not through the natural that I'm going to call my people, but it's going to be through the spiritual offspring between you and Sarah. And if you remember the story, God waited 25 years before Abraham had a child by Sarah, and he was 99 years old, and Sarah was, I think she was about 90, if memory serves me right. But they were well up in years, way past having kids, right? And the point is that they had this child, but it was supernatural. Isaac was supernaturally given. And Paul says that these things are an allegory of the two types of people, the two types of children of Abraham. One was born of the natural, and he says that represents ethnic Israel, and it corresponds to Jerusalem, which is now and is in bondage with his children. And then there is the children that were born of the promise, and that's the church. That's us, whether Jew or, it could be an ethnic Jew, or it could be a Gentile, it could be anybody, right? But whoever that is, they're born of the promise. And it's interesting in there because he says this is Hagar, talking about the ethnic Israel. He says this is Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, where the giving of the law took place, and it corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is. And he's talking there about ethnic Israel. He's talking about Judaism and being centered in Jerusalem. But then he says, which now is, and is in bondage with their children, but the Jerusalem which is above is free, and she is the mother of us all. And he's talking about the new Jerusalem. He's talking about the heavenly Jerusalem. And so he's comparing, Paul says all these things are an analogy. And the bottom line is look, man, the bottom line is that, you're not going to heaven just because you're Jewish. All right, everybody's got to come the same way. They've got to come through Jesus Christ and be saved. I believe God does have a plan for ethnic Israel. I don't think he's done with them as a people, but that plan awaits the return of Jesus Christ. Romans 11:25 tells us that, and then all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion. He will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. And then he says, this is my covenant with them when I will take away their sins. That happens in Zechariah 13. We've been over this a lot of times, so I won't belabor it. But then he says, concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. That's obviously ethnic Israel. That's not spiritual Israel. Obviously, it's ethnic Israel. He says, concerning the gospel, they're enemies. But concerning the election, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. Verse 29, for the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. In other words, God put his favor upon them as a people long ago, and that favor, it is irrevocable. And one day, God is going to bring them around. By and large, Israel rejects Christ as Savior. There's a few Messianic Jews out there, but by and large, Israel is rejecting the first coming of Christ. They're still looking for their Messiah. But there's a day coming, right, when Christ comes, that they're going to turn in mass. So the point is that John picks up on this thing, okay, this teaching, as it were, that there are ethnic Jews and then there are true spiritual Jews. And that's what he's talking about through Revelation. This is one big reason why I think when we talk about the 144,000, they are not to be taken literally, but they are to be taken as representing spiritual Israel, the church. A second reason why they shouldn't be taken literally is that the tribal list, we just read through the list, over 12,000 from this tribe, 12,000 from this, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with that list is that tribal list does not correspond to any tribal lists as they are listed in the Old Testament. There are approximately 20 lists in the Old Testament, roughly all the same list. And this one corresponds to exactly none of them, okay? There are changes in this list that are not the same as the Old Testament lists of Israel, the tribes of Israel. The big difference is that in John's list, the tribe of Dan and Ephraim are both missing, and they're replaced with the tribe of Joseph and Manasseh. And to be fair, a lot of people postulate, well, why is this? Why did he change these two? Both Dan and Ephraim were considered in the Old Testament at times to be apostate tribes, and yet they are still listed in most of those lists, whether they were in idolatry or they were apostate. In fact, the whole nation at one time or another was apostate and was serving idols and this kind of thing. But the point is, they say, well, that's why they're changed, is because they were connected to idolatry or somehow connected to the coming of the Antichrist. But the point is that Dan is listed in every list, whether they were in an apostate state or not. And all I'm saying is look, you say, well, we got to take that literal. How can you take it literal? It doesn't even correspond to any list in the Old Testament, right? And so again, George Eldon Ladd, one of my favorite commentators on this, says, quote, John intends to say here by this irregular list that the 12 tribes of Israel are not really literal Israel, but the true spiritual Israel, the church. So Ladd's pretty smart. He agrees with me, right? But that's what I think's going on. I think that's why it's not a literal taken out of the Old Testament list. It's been changed. Now, the third reason, and this is really the reason, okay? You can, you can argue about the tribes and all that kind of stuff, but this is really the overwhelming evidence to me that says that this is not Jewish people, are literal Jews. It is not Jewish evangelists or some concoction like that. The overwhelming evidence is from the book of Revelation itself, and specifically from chapters 14 and 21. So go with me to chapter 14, and I want to just read you some stuff here, all right? Now, keep in mind in chapter 7, the 144,000, where are they? All right, where are the 144,000? I'll tell you. They're on the earth, right? Because the angel was told, don't let the winds blow, don't let the judgment come until we have sealed the 144,000 in their forehead, the servants of our God in their forehead. So they're on the earth in anticipation. They're being sealed in anticipation of the outpouring of God's wrath. But in chapter 14, they have moved, all right? And in chapter 14, they're no longer on the earth, but they're now in heaven, okay? They have been transported to heaven. Now, logically, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're not going to see it tonight. We'll see it as we get into it. But something happened that moved them from earth to heaven, and I just be right out front. I believe that what moved them from earth to heaven is the rapture of the church. And that rapture takes place, in my opinion, toward the end of chapter 11. We'll get to it all when we get to it. But the point is, they're in heaven. So look in verse number 1, chapter 14. John says, Then I looked, and behold, there was a Lamb standing on Mount Zion. And with him there were 144,000 having his Father's name written on their foreheads. All right. Revelation 3:12 says, He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from God, and I will write on him my new name. So this is the 144,000 spoken of in Revelation 3:12 and in chapter 7, and they're standing now on Mount Zion, okay? Now, Hebrews chapter 12 And verse 18 says this. It says, "For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire and to blackness." In other words, you haven't come to a literal mountain like the children of Israel did when they were before the mountain, when Moses was on the mount. It says, "You have not come to a mountain that may be touched, that burned with fire, and to blackness and darkness and tempest, and to the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. For they could not endure what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it must be stoned or shot through with an arrow." That's taken out of the book of Exodus. "And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, 'I am exceedingly afraid and trembling.'" So the writer here is saying you didn't come to this kind of mount that's where everybody gets freaked out and where the wrath of God is on that mountain. All right, it says, "But you have come now to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven, to God the judge of all, to the spirits of just men who are made perfect, and to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel." And all I'm trying to point out, when he says, "I looked, and behold, there was a lamb standing on Mount Zion," this is Mount Zion. This is the heavenly Mount Zion, where they are at with the Lord. So verse number 2, continuing, John says, "And then I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps." I think this is where we get the idea that we're going to be up in heaven, plucking around on a harp. I love the old joke that says, I can't say it though because here she's coming in, but I'll go ahead and say it. My wife, she's a perfect angel, right? She's always up in the air harping about something. Well, sorry, honey. But anyway, okay, so here they are, okay? I heard the sound of harpists harping their harps. And in verse 3, they sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the four and living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn that song except for the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. And they are explicitly said here to be, quote, redeemed from the earth. Verse 4, "These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins." Now, there's a lot we could say about that. I don't want to get held up here. But number one, just being married, right, and having a wife, that's not defiling, okay? So he says, these are they that are not defiled with women because they're virgins. Well, there's no virtue physically, literally, in virginity if you're married, okay? So the point is, that's a weird kind of statement to make. What he's talking about here, though, is spiritual adultery and spiritual infidelity and being pure and chaste in your affection for Christ, not being drawn away by the world. And you remember we saw that kind of theme being developed in Revelation chapter 2. Remember all the talk about Jezebel, and she teaches my servants to commit fornication and all that. So these are the ones, these 144,000 are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and the Lamb. All right, now let me give you some corresponding scripture. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 1 through 4. Paul says, "Oh, that you would bear with me a little in my folly. And indeed, you do bear with me, for I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. For I have betrothed you to one husband, that I might present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. For if he who comes preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, or you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different gospel which you have not accepted, you may well put up with it." So Paul's saying, I'm worried about you that you're going to get led away by these false teachers, but my job is to present you as a chaste virgin virgin to Christ. He's speaking here in spiritual terms. He's speaking here about people that love Jesus with all their heart. They are not drawn away to other gods. They are not drawn away to false teaching. And that's what it means here in Revelation chapter 14:4. They are not defiled with women, but they are virgins. Also, he says, these are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. John 10:24. Then the Jews surrounded him and said to him, how long do you keep us in doubt? If you're the Christ, tell us plainly. Jesus said, I told you, and you don't believe me. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness of me. But you do not believe because you're not of my sheep. As I said to you, my sheep hear, listen to this, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Okay, so the sheep, these 144,000, are the ones who are spiritual virgins. They are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Again, both of those things are true only of God's people, the church. And it says these were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits to God in the Lamb. James 1:18 says, of his own will he begat us with the word of truth, that we might be kind of a first fruits of his creatures. Okay, so the church is known as the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. In verse 5 it says, in their mouth there was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Colossians 1:22 says, and you who were once alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, he has now reconciled in the body of his flesh through death, to present you holy and unblameable and unreprovable in his sight, if you continue in the faith. So these 144,000, in their mouth was no deceit, and they are without fault before the throne of God. The only people that could be said of, are people who are bought with the blood of Christ, washed in the blood of Christ, and who stand pure and undefiled in the presence of God the Father. If you take this, literally, right? If you take this literally, you got 144,000 people who are literal virgins who literally are without fault and have no sin whatsoever in their life. And there's nobody on the planet that's going to fit that bill. The only ones that fit that bill are the church. And so the point is, all of these descriptors are descriptors of the church of Jesus. And that's who the 144,000 is. It's the church, man, on the earth. And if that's not enough, finally, go with me to chapter 21. And, you guys have heard this, I know, and I'm not teaching any new thing, but maybe some of you never heard it. But Revelation 21, John says, and now this is after the millennial reign and after all Jesus has returned. He says, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. And then I, John, saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem. Over and over again, we're talking about the New Jerusalem. Remember, there's two cities, right, in Revelation, Babylon and the New Jerusalem. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride who is adorned for her husband. This is without question, this is the church, okay, coming down from God out of heaven. It's the New Jerusalem, synonymous with the church. And he says, I heard a loud voice saying, behold, now the tabernacle of God is with men. He would dwell with them and be his people. God will be with them and be their God. God shall wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, sorrow, nor crying, nor pain, for the former things have all passed away. All right. Verse 9. It says, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls filled with the seven last plagues came to me and talked with me and said, come here and I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. This is the church. Okay. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and he showed me the great city, holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone, the jasper, clear as crystal. So this is nothing at all but the church in glory. I mean, anybody that would dispute that, to me, just isn't reading. Okay, because this is the bride of Christ, man. This is the glory-filled church. So she had a great high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. This corresponds to what we're just reading in, in chapter 7, the 12 tribes and the 144,000. So she had on her the names of the 12 tribes, 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the west. And then verse 14, now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on the foundations were written the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 19 through 22, I won't read all of it, but it says very, very clearly that the church of Jesus Christ is built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. So the city, the New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ, has the names of the 12 children of Israel on it, but it also has the names of the 12 apostles form the foundation. Man, if that ain't the church, I don't know what's the church, right? I mean, this is symbolic imagery of the eternal state of the church in glory. And then he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates and its wall, and the city is laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth, and he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. Its length, breadth, and height are all equal. So if you got something that's a certain length that's equal on all sides, and it's equal height, equal width, equal depth, right? Then what do you got? You got a cube. So this city is laid out like a cube, okay? And on a cube, how many edges have you got on a cube? Well, count them up. You know, you got 4 edges on top, 4 edges on bottom, and then 4 that connect the top to the bottom, right? So, let's see, 4 times plus 4 plus 4. How much is that? 12. Oh, 12. And by the way, they're all 12,000 stadia long, okay? So what do you got? You got a city that would that be the circumference? I'm not very good with geometry, but whatever that would be, you know, the perimeter of the whole thing is 12 times 12,000. And how much is 12 times 12,000? Wow, it's 144,000. So isn't that amazing, right? I mean, and my point is to me, if that doesn't scream to you that this is the church, I don't know what will scream it to you. And to me, that's an airtight case. The 144,000 are, without question, in my mind, simply they are the church. They are the church on earth. And this is finally reinforced if there's a unity between this group in chapter 7, the first group, and the second group. We're going to have to wait. I don't have time to get into that, but there's a second group that's mentioned, and there's a continuity between those two groups. I believe, and we'll see this, I'll make the case for it later, but I believe those two groups are the same. What we see in chapter 7, we see the 144,000, we see the church. It's like the wrath of God has come, right? The end of chapter 6. The 6th seal is open. We haven't opened the 7th seal. When the 7th seal opens, that's when the wrath of God is going to be poured out. That doesn't happen until chapter 8. But in the meantime, in chapter 7, the church is sealed on the earth, and it's sealed for the protection of the church, for the spiritual protection of the church. I don't think it means that the church is not going to have any suffering or any hardship. In fact, there's intimations throughout Revelation that the church will. We will. The Antichrist is going to wage war against the church. So it doesn't mean we're not going to have a hard time or there's going to be persecution. There will be, but God is going to preserve His own through the course of that tribulation. God's going to keep His hand on us. God's going to keep us safe from spiritual defection. But the point is then it shows a great multitude at the end of chapter 7, and it's basically we'll go into the detail, and I mean I think it's airtight again, but that group, the great multitude at the end, is the same as the 144,000. It says these are they that have come out now of great tribulation and have washed themselves in the blood. And the bottom line is it's to show us that we need not worry that seal that God puts upon us is going to work. Okay? How many know? I mean, if God seals you unto Himself, there's nothing that's going to take you away from Him, right? And we are already sealed, right? As Christians, we're sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise. But we'll just have to get into all of that. When we get into it, I'll pick it up right there. But the point is don't fear what's coming. I mean, there's some rough stuff I think that's ahead for the planet, but we should not fear. We should know that God's going to keep us, that God's going to protect us, that we're sealed. But that 144,000 men, that's the church, and that's why the angels are told, don't do anything yet until we get God's people secured. And then chapter 8, that's when all hell is going to really break loose on the earth. So does that make sense to you? Chapter 6, chapter 7. I meant to write all that out tonight, and but I mean, before I got here, but I was kind of busy before we started tonight. But the point is, that's the way we're moving. Chapter 5, the book. Chapter 6, the seal, 6 of the seals. Chapter 7, the interlude before the 7th seal is broken, so that the people of God can be sealed and secured. All right? So, anything we need to pray about tonight in closing? You can go ahead and kill the feed there, Trey, if you want to.